Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome everybody this afternoon to this meaningful conversation. My name is Emi Howe and I'm joined here with Suzanne Samaka and Dave Chawner. We are part of the Speakers Collective, and Speakers Collective is a social enterprise. We work together with a shared commitment to challenge stigma, facilitate important conversations, and promote learning on a variety of social issues. You can find out more by visiting speakerscollective.org. Great, that's the official bit out of the way. So this afternoon, we have the meaningful conversation that is honesty about editing. And yeah, we've got some, myself and Suzanne and Dave, we are all, I would say, fairly passionate about this subject and about how it relates to our well-being and our body image. So just to give you a bit of background for each of us. So I campaigned back in 2018 to try and change the law. It didn't, but I tried to change the law so that more bodies were visible in our advertising. That the current status quo is a really skewed image that we portray for everyone, our children especially, but all of us are kind of bombarded with a skewed version of what a healthy body is and what it looks like. I've done an incredible amount of research dispelling the myths that we all have around bodies. I wrote a book called The Body Hoax. So that's me. I want to pass over to Suzanne, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Suzanne.
Of course, thanks, Emi. I'm Suzanne Samaka, and I'm the founder of a campaign called #Honesty About Editing. And up until about 18 months ago, I lived my very normal life. I'd never done any form of campaigning or social change or speaking to people about body image. But unfortunately, 5 years ago, a member of our family was diagnosed with anorexia. And I've never been exposed to eating disorders before, and it just absolutely blew our worlds apart. They spent 3 periods of time in inpatient eating disorder units. And whilst our member of our family was our first-hand experience, what absolutely blew my mind was how many people were and how full to bursting these eating disorder units were. And I think I came away from that and thought, obviously, it was a horrendous experience for our family, and a very long, drawn-out experience. But I think it just made me think something has to be done about this to support people if they go through it, to try and support people very early on, because it's massively damaging to their lives, and causes a long-term difficulty. So I got into campaigning from just being a mum of 2 children and a stepmom of 4, so quite a busy household, but just thought, I have to try and do something about this. I have a job that's absolutely nothing to do with this, and I have a life that's absolutely nothing to do with this, but it didn't stop me from thinking something needs to be done. So that's me. I'll hand over to Dave.
Go for it, Dave.
Well, I mean, how do you follow that? I mean, incredible introductions, amazing, worthwhile individuals, and I'm here to buck that trend. I am just a professional idiot. But I have my own experience of anorexia. I started developing anorexia when I was a teenager. And by the time I was 23, I was diagnosed as severely clinically anorexic. I was under the care of the Maltese Hospital for 2.5 years. But now I sensitively try and use comedy in order to get people talking about that perhaps in a different way, and to help those people that do have experience of eating disorders to feel less alone, but also to help entertain and educate a large group of people. So I suppose that's me.
Fantastic. So I'm coming at this from the assumption that we kind of understand, there is an understanding that the landscape that we are sort of living in today is so much more online, it's so much more digital. And I guess that an assumption that not everybody maybe has, that what we absorb from that space is potentially not that healthy, and especially not that healthy for our our body image. To explain body image, it's simply how we feel about our bodies and how our bodies look, and so the things that we think and how we feel about it. And so for me, I think that this campaign, Suzanne, is so important because one of the biggest, most influential things that landscape does present us with is false imagery. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Weirdly, it wasn't to do with my family that necessarily made this so relevant. I had my first child 4 years ago, and since then I've had another one. So I've had two very different experiences. And after my first child, I realized that I was following, and almost without realizing, looking at a lot of content online that didn't add any help to my life at all. And actually, there's a virtual world, but it very much had an impact on my real world. So that was looking at celebrities or people online that have these perfect bodies and look a certain way that society tells us is perfect, whether that be bright white teeth, for example. I don't have bright white teeth, but I suddenly had a bit of a fixation around, I need to get my teeth whitened. And my partner was like, absolutely, you do not. But I realized that the more I was looking at content that was affecting me, and it made me think, I'm a 34-year-old woman. I know that a lot of this content isn't real, but because I'm looking at it all the time, it's almost like that question of seeing is believing. So your brain tells you, well, I can see it, so it must be real. But actually there is a lot of filters, a lot of editing. It's got more and more, the technology is unbelievable what they can do. Video editing as well. And I just think for younger people as well, this pressure that it puts on.
Have you frozen? Davey, Suzanne.
I'm still here. I think Suzanne was just taking a dramatic pause, which I think is
Where's she gone?
It's really worked, but I think the pause is a little bit too, like, you know,
she's hamming it up now, isn't she?
Yeah, it's, you know, I mean, which is really annoying because she was making a very good point. As she was talking about technology and stuff. I hate to say it, but I was also thinking, what a waste. Like, if we put that time and effort into trying to reduce global warming, reduce emissions, increase food, you know, sort of decrease food disparity. But yeah, actually, it is one of those things that body image is so important to so many people that, yeah, we've wasted it, which is actually a really good thing that I wanted to ask you. So what do you think about, why do you think we need to talk about this? Because you're very good at talking about this in the workplace. That's where a lot of us spend a lot of our time. Why do you think body image is so important to the workplace?
Well, really good time to ask me this, because just yesterday I have a job that's totally unrelated to this, and the people that I work with, I'm in quite a new team, and they don't know that I do this at all. So I was able to be like a fly on the wall in an office yesterday while there was this conversation going on, and they were talking about how Roald Dahl's books are being updated. Have you heard about this, Dave? Yes, yeah. So Roald Dahl's books, so cutting out words like fat, or other words that are now just not really acceptable, you know, in the 21st century. The people that were in the room with me yesterday were slightly older than me, but not that much older than me. And there were things coming out like, well, I read the Roald Dahl books and I'm not anorexic. And what I was hearing was a lot of resistance, was a lot of misinformation. And I hate this word because I wouldn't like them to think that I'd said it. Ignorance, basically, is that this is a subject that most people don't know about. And one way that we can change that and improve all of our communities at the same time is to educate people about this subject. So I did, by sort of towards the end, I did kind of like go, I'm creating a curriculum for this exact thing. And actually it's really important that they're updating the Roald Dahl books, because in fact, everything needs to shift. And, you know, then they started saying, but why start with Roald Dahl books? Why not look at social media? We need to look at everything. It incorporates and encompasses our entire society. It is such an ingrained myth that the only valuable body is a thin one. It is such a big issue that needs unpicking in absolutely every walk of life and every area, just like other things have in recent years too. So that is why I think it's so important in the workplace, aside from the fact that from a well-being aspect, there will be people of diverse bodies in the workplace overhearing those kind of conversations, or fat talk conversations, or diet talk, or, you know, anything like that, excuse me. And for those people who, you know, we often don't consider might be taking a bit of a hit from those conversations because we haven't been in their position, and they're not sitting there going, excuse me, this is making me feel terrible. You know? Suzanne, I'm so glad you're back. Hello.
It's always the way. Wi-Fi is stable for.
Where were we? Let's pick it up.
I'm now on my phone, so it should definitely work. So I'm back in the game.
No problem. Where were we? Can you remember? We were talking about technology, and, you know, you
yeah. I think I was talking about the fact that I've realised myself how much of an effect that what I was almost unconsciously looking at was really affecting me, and the effect that then has on your real life. So how you really feel, how you get up for the day, how it affects your relationships, how you feel about yourself. And I was very conscious of this as a 34-year-old adult. And then I thought, I've also just seen full to bursting young people eating disorder units where their self-esteem is extremely low. And it just made me realise that something has to change. And body image it's such a ingrained thing that we don't realise how much of an effect it has on how you feel. And I think what I want people to understand is you don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to be a certain way to be deemed successful or happy or any of the goals that you want to achieve. And I think that's what I'm really keen in talking about this for young people, but also older people as well, because I've seen it directly affect myself.
I think that is a really, sorry, go on, Emi.
No, you go.
Because I think that's a really good point, but something that I think is really important, and this is a question to both of you, something that unfortunately is very real, and we can be try and be as well-meaning as we can. There is such a thing as pretty privilege, and it has benefited certain people. So how do we combat that, not only in the workplace, but in larger life as well?
I mean, I was just having this conversation this morning actually about how CEOs, often female CEOs, are very pretty. You know, they look a bit like, the lady used the word superstars. And I can't help but think that there's discrimination in HR offices, as there is discrimination everywhere. And another reason why we need to have this conversation more and more in the workplace, because we need to be able to override any preconceptions that we've got of people, in order to create a more visually diverse world, I guess. The thing that I was going to say before is, from the research, or from the research that I've done, diversity in society, if it's not already abundantly obvious to people, is totally natural. You know, to have people in bigger bodies is the way it's meant to be. To have some people in smaller bodies is the way it's meant to be. The same way as there is a whole range of skin colour, hair colour, height, everything else. It's absolutely normal for me to take up my place in society as this is my body and I don't need to change it to be any different. You know, so I want to get that in here, because we don't hear that enough. You know, diversity is normal, but this just doesn't usually fall into the diversity conversation. So again, we can start bringing it into the diversity conversation and saying, now hang on a minute, there's more than just you know, what is usually covered in your equality statement going on here. This is never covered in it. That's how little people are aware of it, I suppose. Do you have any thoughts, Suzanne?
I think, just to go back to what Dave said, that is very, very true, that pretty privilege does exist. And I think that, just to give a slightly different view on it as well, I think it was one of the news stories of late, and there was a senior police officer who wore a blue dress, had straightened her hair, didn't look overly glamorous, but didn't look like she'd just got out of bed. And she was absolutely threads in the media and online for, you know, you're doled up, you're meant to be a copper on a senior investigation. I think when I think about myself, I mean, it's no secret. So I love bright colours. I've got red hair, I've got red lips. I recently bought a red suit, and I wear a red suit to work when I feel least confident. So weirdly, if I don't feel confident, then I fake it, because nobody thinks the woman in a red suit isn't confident. So if you see me wearing bright red, I'm probably at my least confident. But it was just really interesting how a lot of the time you can't win, because, as Dave was saying, pretty privilege does exist. But then it's almost like, but don't be too pretty, because actually you're meant to be a senior police officer or something else. So actually it comes back to this conversation around, shouldn't really matter what you look like. And very quickly, just an example of that, I mean, I've worked for a bank since I was 17. I've also been a redhead for about 15 years, and a lot brighter than this in the past. Quite often I had managers that said, you can't have bright red hair and work for a bank. Well, I can. I'm very good at what I do, and I'll show you I can have bright red hair and work for a bank. What difference does it make? And over the years, people have realised it makes no difference what I look like to how capable I am at my job or not. And I think it's reiterating, and that's why what you're doing, Emi, especially in the workplace, is so important, because it's reiterating that actually the way you look doesn't determine anything else about you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, we need to be careful how our senior leaders are modelling it as well. I'm fascinated that people have got into a position of senior leadership but still have not made peace with themselves or made peace with their bodies. I remember going to an opening of something in the local town, and the mayoress, on opening it, basically, but you know, gave herself a kind of real put down in a bodily way. I can't now for the life of me remember what it was, but it was something about a diet or something like, I need to, I don't know. And it was such a shame, from such a kind of poignant moment of real kind of, you know, this female mayor, and I don't know if she's the first one, but certainly I've not seen one before in our town. And yeah, it was a bit like, oh, you know, apologize for yourself. Just
See, no.
and I think maybe that's part of the problem is and this brings me on to a really good conversation I want to ask Dave about, actually, because there is a real I think we use our bodies as a very easy icebreaker, because it's something that we perceive that everybody understands, but in order to buy into that, we're almost perpetuating the problem. So I remember being in the sea and not having a wetsuit on, and a woman coming up, and I was the only person in the crazy enough not to have a wetsuit on, and a woman came up to me and said, well, you'll lose more weight that way. Never met her before in my life, don't have any idea who she is, but it's something that we say in a way that, and she will assume that I will self-deprecate then and go, oh yeah, you know, unagree, or, you know, break the ice that way. I see a lot of comedians do it, and I see it used in conversations around, you know, I don't know, just, yeah, ice-breaking conversations, but also this self-deprecating thing. I don't think it's just British, but we are very good at it. How are we ever going to stop that, Dave? We're not, are we? What do you think?
Well, you know, the real question is, though, do we want to stop it? And I think that's the point. Firstly, something I do have to clarify: you said that you weren't wearing a swimsuit. Were you just saying that you were skinny dipping? Is that the story, that Emi Howe was skinny dipping?
Not that time. I was wearing a swimsuit. I wasn't wearing a wetsuit.
Right. Okay. I was going to say that is incredibly brave. And so,
not middle of the afternoon in Devon. No, not for me.
Never in Devon for me. I will never understand what people like about going in the sea in Britain. It's just cold. It's just cold. I think, getting back to your point about humour, though, you know what? I think I have different views on this, and I think that might be informed by my gender, because I think, like it or lump it, I do think, look, I don't want to be a libtard about this. I think women are much more skewed about their looks than men are. And I think that that's why, actually, if you do want to change the conversation around body image, you have to include and educate men within that as well. So I think that is really, and that's one of the things that I think actually makes recovery from restrictive eating disorder a lot easier for a bloke. I don't think you are bombarded with the same types and amounts of images that the female counterparts are. I quite like, in your story about the mayor, obviously it depends on how it's done, but I think that makes that person human. And I love that. And I love people picking out their flaws, because it makes them relatable to me. But I think the real question there is, what is your intent behind doing this? Now, especially with comics, and again, to pick up on the gender point, I've heard numerous comics who are very well known and on TV like numerous times now, but I won't name them because it's not fair and it's their anecdote to have. But they've talked to me and others before about how they have said, you're a very good comedian, but you will never make it big because you're too pretty. Women can't be pretty and funny. So perhaps that is a point there. But also, I think that humour is, you know, it's really weird that you say this, because I'm doing a little bit at the moment about, and I'll save you the set, but a girl came up to me after a gig the other day and said, I once slept with a bloke who looked exactly like you, which made me, thank you, that is uncomfortable, right?
Awkward.
And she hadn't said anything wrong, and you know, I couldn't have a go, but I felt so uncomfortable, and that's led to a lot of kind of self-deprecating humor. But I think the intent behind it there is to be more, ironically, kind of body positive, and instead of sort of saying, I don't think that good body image is saying I absolutely love every single part about myself every single day, because like you said so eloquently before, that is just an unrealistic body expectation, which is adding to the ones that we have. I think constantly berating yourself is not helpful either. But I think there is a midway, the odd kind of jibe. I think that humor can be used to bring people together as well as put people down. And I think that that is what is so important about kind of using it, of having a little jibe like you would do with a mate or a colleague or a friend.
I do wonder if because it is always, as you pointed out, which I hadn't actually twigged, but the three comics I'm thinking of, they're all men. And maybe they just don't realise how it hits to a woman. How it happens to a woman, maybe. And that actually it's not that attractive.
Well, I think there's also something to be said as well about I do think that if you tell a bloke that they're fat, generally that will be received in a very different way to if you told a female or someone who's female identifying that they're fat. But one thing I will say, years ago, I used to work for a radio station for builders because my career was on fire.
There's a radio station for builders?
Oh, yeah. It was horrendous. Toxic masculine FM. And it was I never forget, like, I could bore you with so many stories about that. It was like blokes that decided to be a stereotype of testosterone, but it was a small team, and I can absolutely tell you that every single one of the presenters at some point in time carefully picked their time and came up to me, and they knew that I did stuff on eating disorders, asked about either eating disorders or body image.
And this I find fascinating is that once you start talking to anyone, literally anyone, about this, they'll be like, oh, you know, it's a fascinating subject because it's something that for the most part of our lives has only existed inside our head, that we've never actually kind of, you know, talked to anybody about, admitted to anybody that we might be struggling with this. We've actually really normalized what is essentially a mental health crisis. You know, I've heard people say, you know, we are living through a body image crisis, and we've totally normalized it. We've totally decided that it's okay. We don't even see that it's a problem. What do you think, Suzanne?
Also, that in regards to the male-female conversation, I absolutely get what they've said. But I do think that's changed quite a bit. Since I've been campaigning, the amount of boys and young men who are struggling hugely with their body image, more around not being big enough and masculine enough and muscular and lean and all of these things, which is almost having as much of an effect. And I think I would argue that sometimes I think that's almost creates more of a problem because it is deemed a female problem in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
it becomes okay to ask for help or be talked about. But I think for men and young boys or anyone who identifies as male, it becomes I can't have body image issues or an eating disorder or a problem of those sorts because I've never seen anybody have one. I think that's a really important conversation to have, that actually it affects everybody.
Yeah, which I think is where Dave's work and Dave's book, which you should mention, Dave, right, is really important.
Well, I don't want to be arrogant, but my book does make an absolutely excellent doorstop. That's what I will say. I've used it. It's very good for plugging gaps. It's incredibly flammable, so you can use it to make fires as well. But something you are too sweet, Emi. That is too kind. Thank you very much.
Very good. Congratulations.
But one thing that thank you, and I wanted to pick up to both of you, but on Suzanne's point. Do you think that is a gender thing, or do you think that people, and again, this is why it goes back to this idea of I kind of like in certain parameters when people use humor to talk about their body image negatively, is it blokes feeling that they can't go and get help, or do they feel scared of being vulnerable? I think that women are generally a lot better at being vulnerable around other women. And I think men generally tend to, and I think we're getting better at it, but even, when you're at school, there is a guy who I will remain nameless and you can see the bit online, but he sort of does a whole bit about the mental health chat and people sort of saying, there was someone from Love Island that took their own life. And he said, I sent a chat to one of the MAGA Love WhatsApp groups saying, hey guys, I know things are really bad right now, but I'm always here if you want to talk to me. And someone texts back and said, I didn't want to kill myself before, but I do now. And it's that kind of laddie sort of like, and there does seem to me that it's an underpinning of like a fear of being vulnerable.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's lifting that lid off, and it's something that generally, of course, that women are better talkers, do talk about their problems more, and men generally have struggled with that. So I think again it's trying to remove the gender orientation that comes with that and making it available for everyone. And I think that is being, as a woman, as a mother, as a partner, I'm very, very conscious that my partner, you probably won't tell me as quickly as I'll tell you if there's something wrong. I have to ask if there's something wrong, whereas he will very much know.
Yes. Dave, have you got any advice? How do you overcome that vulnerability, and you know, what can you do?
I mean, that's the really, I mean, can you ask something again? Like something cryptic, like, have you got
I'll ask you an easy one after this one.
I think one of the things about vulnerability that's really important is picking your times. I think that's really important as well, knowing when is a good time to be vulnerable and knowing who you're vulnerable with and knowing that person as well. I think that distractions are absolutely key. So I think it's great if you're playing on the PlayStation, if you're playing a board game, if you're going on a walk, whatever it is. I think distraction is absolutely key to that. And I also am a big fan of breadcrumbing, which, you know, sort of like dropping little hints in every now and then to see how they get received, rather than being halfway around Tesco's going, where have all the bloody tomatoes gone? And then go, I'm having a body image crisis. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's little and often building to things.
Yeah, that's really good advice, actually. Thank you. Right.
If I relay that advice onto the men in my life, that bread is the only way to get them to open up, and again, pick in your times. So I think that is very good advice from a man. It certainly works on the men in my world.
Well, I'd like also a little tip that I always use as well is because I've had people give pushback before, like understandably, but this is more of a larger mental health context of sort of saying, you know, we all get a little bit sad sometimes, you know. I've had this with people sort of saying about depression of like, yeah, you know what, I've been sad before, but I get on with it. And the point that I always make there is, because I think it is a brilliant point, and I think it is perhaps a bit mashed made, but there is a difference between emotions and mental health, and the difference between those two are a bit like the difference between weather and climate. So your emotions are a lot like the weather, they change 2-3 times a day, and up until a point that's very good. However, your mental health is your mental climate. It should always be dry, sunny and warm, and obviously the odd rainy day, the odd cloudy day, that helps things to grow. But if it's always rainy, if it's always cloudy, if it's always dark, that's not an environment that you can flourish in. And I think speaking in those terms of using analogies and using numbers, for example, okay, you said you feel a bit rubbish. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being terrible, 10 being euphoric, what number do you feel? Those little tips can really help open the space, because one of the things that reverted me to the anorexia was I knew there was something wrong, but I couldn't find the words to articulate that. And everyone always says about mental health, just talk, but I don't think suicide's the biggest killer of blokes because they don't think to open their gobs. I think it's a lot harder than that, and I think we need to give tools and tips on how to communicate.
I was just reading a book recently about there being even some people that can't access kind of that self-awareness.
Interesting.
So I don't know if it's called Alexa.
Oh, alexithymia. Yeah, alexithymia. Really. So no, alexithymia is an inability to understand and articulate emotions as I understand it.
Yes, that sounds about right.
So, for example, which actually isn't that mad, because think about when you're excited about something, and then think about when you're anxious about something. Actually, they elicit the same physical things. You might sweat, you might get a little bit jittery, your mouth might go dry, but even on an emotional level, they feel very similar as well. And I think that emotional understanding is really important.
I'm gonna.
You just muted.
My dog's really barking. That's why I was on mute.
Oh, please get your dog involved.
I've locked her away, but
please.
She was before. She was here before, but she's gone. So, can society ever change, Suzanne? Can society ever change its views on body image and diet culture? What do you see as being not the cure, because there maybe isn't a cure, but what are some steps forwards? What would progress look like?
I think it can, and I think we're getting there. And I think change of anything doesn't happen overnight, but anything worth doing is worth working hard for. I do think we're getting to a point where people are seeing different bodies, different people, different abilities. Workplaces, not all workplaces, but we're getting there, are getting a lot more aware of diversity. Diversity 10 years ago in my company was about race. Diversity today is about all sorts of things, whether it be what you look like, your mental health, your socioeconomic background. So it's becoming a lot wider. And I do think there are changes that happen. And I think that, if I'm honest, I think it's because of people like all of us and many others that are each doing their own little step. Collectively, that is changing things, whether that be laws and regulations or just movement of people's views, and that is changing. So I do think it happens, and I do think it is slowly there. But my views and my partner's views are very different to his parents' views, for example. So there are changes happening, and I'm an eternal optimist.
Yes, great. I think from my point of view, one of the areas that I've been working on recently is in primary schools. We have seen some cursory sort of curriculum body image stuff in senior schools, and it's great to see it. I think it could be improved. I think it could be better. However, I feel like once you're there, the damage has already been done. The kids already have phones by that time. They've already absorbed lots and lots of conditioning around. And I love this sentence, Suzanne. I've actually written it down that you've said. I can see it, so it must be real. And I think kids especially will very much be of that mentality, and being able to reach them at that point and being able to just, gently and with, different kind of fun exercises and all the rest of it, introduce the idea and the concept around what the internet is and how it works and why. Because at the minute, it's for them, it's a bit like breathing. It's always been there. It will always be there. It's just a thing that exists, and they haven't yet learned any kind of critical thinking around it. I was just reflecting this morning that we teach a lot more on homophones than we do on telephones. Because, the amount of lessons that there must be on whether a word is spelt the same, but, sounds the same, but is spelt differently, it is probably not as important to their future well-being as if we could just teach them that the images in the phone aren't real. So for me, that's a massive part of how we can shape future generations. I have seen some change since I first started looking at this area back in 2017, 2018, I have seen a lot of things change. I've not seen enough. And I'm really proud to work with the companies that I work with who are making, you know, really positive strides in the right direction. But I wish, you know, as with everything, it's a very, very slow process. And I've spoken to you, Suzanne, about the frustrations I've had about trying to engage with, you know, the government, about trying to, you know, create change. It's pushing a boulder up a hill, isn't it? But the fact is we are pushing it. So,
and I think just to add to that, young people and children perspective, and whilst I am campaigning for digital editing and media content, what I have been so very aware of, probably more so since becoming a parent and my children not being babies but having a 4-year-old, is doesn't matter what I say, it matters what I do. If I weigh myself constantly or berate myself for not fitting in a pair of jeans that I fit in 10 years ago, or those sort of things, that's what she'll pick up on. She's not necessarily going to pick up on the fact, and you know, it's just the language that I use, I've become really conscious of, and just making sure that actually if I'm saying something, because what I realised with having a 4-year-old is, where have you even learned that? I didn't do, and I'm not talking about anything body image related. It was just amazing what they could pick up. And that's when I realised that I need to change. I've spent all my life trying to be thinner. I'm not. Why? What difference does that make? And my mindset actually changed because I don't want my daughter, or if I had a son, it would be the same. I don't want my children to grow up thinking I need to be different to what I am.
I totally agree with that. I think for me, I mean, I haven't even mentioned that I'm a cancer survivor, and actually it was post my operations that I finally realized, what am I doing? What have I been wasting my time doing? My body's kind of it's just gradually kind of what's the word? You know, naturally, I don't want to say decomposing, but basically from the minute we're born, we're you know, we're getting scars, we're getting older, our skin's getting less elastic, our hair's going grayer, you know, my teeth aren't as white, or whatever it is. I remember before I got ill thinking, oh, I must do something about the thread veins on my thighs. That was like the thing that I was kind of really focused on, and then the whole world kind of fell apart, and you know, I lost appendages, let's say, and then suddenly I've got this body that, you know, is nothing like the body that I was born in and will never ever be, and it was still an amazing body that gives me these most amazing experiences and allows me to, I mean, even the kids now, you know, we're 10 years on now, so I'm now seeing things at one point I never thought I'd see. I might not have even, you know, got to this point. So I am absolutely filled with gratitude for my body, which I think is an important point, because most people aren't. Most people very much take their bodies for granted and want to treat it like an object rather than treating it like, oh, Dave, your screen's just gone a bit wobbly again, rather than treat it like the absolute, you know, hero that it is, you know. Yeah. It's one of them. So yeah, I think that was for me. I want to ask you, Dave, in terms of change and in terms of, you know, society, how do you bring comedy into talking about body image? Why is it important to bring comedy into it?
Well, I don't know if I can follow something as beautifully profound as that with something so frivolous and stupid. I think the fundamental thing for me about comedy is that when people are laughing, they have to be listening. And when they are listening, they can learn. And you can use that in order to try and reach out and say to people, oh, by the way, I've stepped in those shoes as well. But also to help engage a larger community that might never have thought, or let's be honest, even cared about this stuff. Because I think one of the things that I've been ruminating on as we've been going through this conversation is that this sort of change doesn't need to happen with one person, one technology, not even one thing. It's a sort of a whole shift. And I think one of the brilliant things about humor is that it can bring people on board and bring them to care about something that they might not. Oh, no.
It's special. Carry on talking, we can still hear you.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm in a Wham video. Like, you know what I mean? It all goes 80s. But yeah, I think bottom line, I think one of the things that I think I'll always pound this drum, but like we can laugh before we can talk. And I'd actually say that humor is more universal than language, because I could go to China or India and show them Mr. Bean. They wouldn't have a clue who I am and why I've turned up with a video recorder of Mr. Bean, but they would still find it like kind of funny. And I think it can definitely be detrimental, but I think it can also be used now brilliantly. If you haven't seen, there's an incredible performer called Jess Foster-Q who does the Hoovering podcast. She was nominated for the Edinburgh Comedy Award a couple of years ago, and she does a show about not only her getting pregnant, but her mom always trying to ask her why she wasn't a girly girl. And when she was in the gym lifting weights, a guy coming over to her and going, "Girl, you're hench." And she's like, you know, as body positive as I want to be, I don't think we're ready for that right yet, mate. And she's brilliant. And I think there are so many comics talking about positive and real body image.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think we are definitely making progress. I mean, I've left the most essential question probably till last, and probably the most important question, and that is, why do you look like Adam Sandler?
Well, I think it's years of conditioning, and yeah, I mean, I actually used to be blonde-haired, brown-eyed, and then I just changed this. This is a good question though. Like, okay, body image wise, who would play either of you in a film of your life and why?
Ooh.
Adam Sandler, I can promise you that much.
Say that again, Suzanne?
Not Adam Sandler.
I would hope not. I mean, I'd like it to be Emma Thompson, because she is such a, you know, body image aware, very, very vocal on the subject. I'd like it to be her, very vocal on the subject, and a real kind of ambassador for this kind of subject.
I'd like it to be me.
You'd like it to be you?
Yeah, why not? I've never been in a film. If I'm going to have a film about me, I'll play me.
Very good answers.
Yeah, I love it. Is there anything anyone wants to add?
So I think the only thing I've asked both of you from a social media perspective on your views, and it's a bit of a general question, good or bad for body image? What do you reckon?
Social media?
Yeah.
I mean, bad, yeah. It's an unusual one. I actually have 3 Instagram accounts. One of them is kind of a personal one. One of them is work, and it's this related work. And for a long time, I liked being in that space of this related work, because I did not see the standard thin body, go on a diet, here's some exercises for you to do, more thin bodies, blah, blah, blah. I would see a lot of body positive posts. I would see a lot of different bodies, and that's absolutely what I wanted to do and wanted to see. But then it's kind of over time, I guess I might have just got bored of that content. Is that terrible? That's terrible. Sorry. And I think that's true of anything. And so I think it's really important with your social media to be more. This is what we don't do. We don't engage in what we're seeing. We almost just allow what we're seeing to kind of float before our eyes without going, oh, I'm getting a bit bored of this now, I'm just going to unfollow that, and I might find something different to follow, so I'm going to follow that instead. It's this stream of like body consciousness. Whereas my personal Instagram is like a lovely, comfy place to be. And there is a little bit of that, but I do love it. I really feel really kind of like cherished, and my loved ones are on there, and I come away feeling uplifted. And when I do my other talk, which is about digital wellbeing, I talk all about the fact that we use these grey boxes to feel things. You know, it's technology and hardware and software. It's actually feelings, you know, loads and loads of heightened feelings. To the point that I might have to start calling Facebook, I used to call it fake book, I might have to start calling it dead book, because every time I go on there, someone's died, or a pet or something, and I'm like, I can't cope. I can't actually cope from a mental health point of view. And maybe that's the age I'm getting to. Oh my gosh. It really, the social media is as good as it is bad, I think, but we need to have a more engaged relationship with it, and we need to take more control over what we're seeing on a like much more regular basis. What do you reckon, Dave?
I think it's sewage. I've got to admit, because my sort of relationship with it was like, for example, I joined Twitter to see, you know, videos of dogs barking the alphabet, or, you know, that silly sort of stuff, and it was silly and it was fun, but I have twin problems with it. I think it's become a vile bile cesspit of people saying things that they would never say to anybody's face, or, and I actually think unfortunately equally as bad, people becoming brands, people tweeting or texting or posting about things that they think that they should. I mean, my partner was away on a conference the other day, and someone that was there openly just said, oh, I've got to post to Instagram now, and had got numerous different photos of themselves saved on their camera reel to just share at different times of day. And I'm like, you know what, like I really don't think that is any beneficial. And I think we've come full circle now, where people go to social media, people go there to be brands, and brands go there to be people. I mean, I can relate to Aldi's Twitter feed a lot better than I can to a lot of people that I know on social media, because they will only either talk about one certain thing, or they will do it in very kind of brand aware terms, whereas Aldi or Ryanair's social media account is just stupid and silly and fun.
And I think that's it, isn't it? You can get such a spectrum of different experiences. Here's something that you've just triggered in me, is it's not just that I was bored of that Instagram feed of mine, it's that it makes my toes curl.
Yes.
That some of what I'm seeing, I'm just like, oh, you did that. Oh, I wish you didn't do that. I see through. I see through them, and I want to bring Suzanne into this conversation, because she is maybe the only person who I know who is voracious on social media, but does it so beautifully and so honestly, and just in a really kind of relatable way. And I kind of, to be honest, I see her post and I'm just like, I can't do what she does. How does she do it? I want to be more like you. And I can't do it. Oh, are you there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I suppose that was just me a bit girl fanning over you. Just you know, I think she did a fabulous job anyway. So yeah.
I would agree. I definitely think, to your point, Emi, I think it can be bad, it can be good, I've seen, but what I've realized is I have to be in that driving seat. So I have to make sure I'm following content that makes me happy, muting what I don't like, unfollowing, even if it's friends. They don't know if I can't see it. But actually, if it's not helping me in the real world, I get rid.
Yeah.
I would say as well, just to, of course, anyone that's watching this should follow Emi and should follow Suzanne. But I also would find 2 or 3 social media accounts that you follow for fun. For example, my two would be Larry the cat, I think is really great, the Downing Street cat. And I also found one which was the World Bollard Appreciation Society, and they are just bollards from around the UK, and it's great. It's great because they talk about them like people would have done in the 80s of like sexy women and stuff like, whoa, look at the legs on this one. And then they're just bollards. It's great.
Oh, I love that. I have a couple of really good ones. So, in fact, I follow the Happy Co, which is a really nice one to follow. And it's kind of visual. It's kind of like how we feel, but in visual diagrams. It's really, and then you look at it and you're like, how? I don't understand what Emi's saying about that, but look at it, a happy. And yeah, it's very, very good. And I love to watch, I love to look at things like called It's Abandoned, you know, like buildings, like it's so not related to anything, bodies or food or anything, but it's fascinating, you know, these kind of things that, and you don't even realize these things are out there half the time because your feed is bombarded with the usual, you know. And it does, everybody's feed is different. I have to keep reminding myself of this, that like my son has a feed that's absolutely full of bikes, you know, and my daughter has a feed that's absolutely full of bodies. Don't ask. It's sad, but it's true. But yeah, so anyway, I can just say that I have loved this. I always love chatting with you, Dave, and it's been an absolute pleasure, Suzanne, to chat with you. Hopefully we can do it soon.
Pleasure.
And if as a final remark, what I've written down, I can see it, so it must be real. I'm gonna hold on to that. And who, what is it? To engage communities who have never even thought about this subject from Dave. I've written that down as well. So those are the two things that I've taken from today. Just a huge thank you, and yeah, hopefully see you soon.